Tim's 2 for $4 breakfast sandwich deal is back, only at Tim Hortons. That means you can wake up to a great breakfast at a great price. Get 2 breakfast sandwiches on a freshly baked bagel, home-style biscuit, or English muffin with either sausage or bacon for just $4. It's a deal so good, I'm on my way to Tim Hortons right now. Literally. At participating U.S. restaurants, offer available on standard breakfast sandwiches for a limited time plus applicable taxes. Single sandwiches at regular price.
Who cannot remember the movies Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and then the newest will be coming out very soon, Lewis Smith and the Testimonium. Coming up next, right here on The Parker J. Cole Show. To the show. I am so glad you are here with me. I hope you enjoyed my intro into the show because Lewis Smith is by far one of my wonderful guests that I love to have on the show. He's such a wealth of knowledge and information, and I kind of think of him as my Indiana Jones go-to. So, Lewis, I hope you appreciate that, Lewis. And so I'm just really excited to have him on the show today. We'll be talking about a topic that I think is highly important in all our biblical studies, and that's archaeology and how archaeology and the Bible fit together. Now, archaeology is usually, when we see about it, we see it in movies, we see it in documentaries, and people go into the earth and they find out all these different things about the past, whether it's in Greece or Greece or a Middle Eastern country, Africa. You know, archaeology is a wonderful field of study to discover things about the past. And so when we're talking about discovering things about the past, we can't help but wonder, does archaeology and the Bible have good, close-knit ties to each other? And I believe that they do. And with me to discuss that is my guest and co-host and contributor, Lewis Smith. He's an author as well as a just historian and wonderful guy to have on the show with us today. If you want to weigh in on our topic, you certainly can by calling in at 646-668-8485 and then press 1 to be live on air. Or you hit me on Twitter, Parker J. Cole, hashtag PJC Show, with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Question: if you write a book, everybody will rush out to buy it. Obvious answer, no. If you were a celebrity or if you had a huge marketing budget, then maybe you can get a lot of exposure for your book. Another solution would be to check out joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com is a promotion and marketing service with access to over 1/3 of a million followers on Twitter. joeytweets.com has 3 packages available to fit any budget. That's joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com. Get some serious exposure for your books.
Hi, friends. I'm Dr. Mike Spaulding, inviting you to listen to great Bible teaching on the Transforming Word radio show and podcast. All shows are available on iTunes and Stitcher. Search for the Transforming Word and subscribe for notification of new shows. You may also listen to every episode from my website, www.thetransformingword.com. In addition to the Transforming Word, I want to make you aware of my interview, news, and opinion show, Soaring Eagle Radio. If you're interested in engaging conversations related to a variety of topics not covered by typical news media, then check out Soaring Eagle Radio. You may subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher, and you may listen to every episode on my website, www.soaringeagleradio.com. For more information on my ministries, please email me, Pastor Mike, at cclohio.com. Again, that's Pastor Mike at cclohio.com. Thank you for listening to these shows, and please leave me a note when you do. God bless you today.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Parker J. Cole Show right here on WPJC 104.5. So glad you are here with me. Like I said in the beginning of our show that we're going to be talking about archaeology and the Bible and how they are really well knitted and fitted together. And with me to do that is my wonderful returning guest and co-host and contributor, Lewis Smith. Lewis, how are you doing today?
Oh, doing just fine here on a gloomy, rainy day down in Texas. How are things up your way?
It's a little clear, a little chilly. It's Michigan. You know, what are you going to do? It's just Michigan. What are you going to do? So just really excited to have you with me on the show. I'm just really excited. So I want people just to have an idea of who you are. Let's say if this is the first time listening to the show, go ahead and tell us who you are in your own words.
Okay, well, my name is Lewis Smith. I've lived most of my life down here around Greenville, Texas. I'm a Navy veteran, school teacher, pastor, novelist. I wear a whole bunch of different hats. But I've always had a lifelong interest in archaeology. When I was 5 years old, I found an Indian arrowhead in a sand pile in a neighbor's yard, and that really kind of started my interest in the past. And since high school, I've just been fascinated with biblical archaeology and some of the discoveries that have been made in the Middle East that have really shed a lot of interesting light on the biblical narrative. And biblical archaeology is a theme in two of my books. The Testimonium and Matthew's Autograph are both fictitious stories about a crew of biblical archaeologists making discoveries. And while the discoveries in my book are fictitious, they're certainly the kind of things that could be found. There's an amazing amount of stuff out there yet to be discovered, and more discoveries being made all the time. So that's what I've tried to emphasize in my works, and just tried to show the extent to which history and archaeology have, to a remarkable degree, confirmed the narrative of the Bible, especially with regards to the New Testament.
How you like the fact that I made your book into a movie?
Oh, I wish. I've tried to get a couple of copies of the Testimonium into the hands of screenwriters with no luck so far, but yeah, it would be a blockbuster.
I think it would be. I do know a screenwriter. Just met him last year on the show. I'll be glad to connect you guys together. So really what
sure.
Oh, yeah, would definitely like to do that. But what I'm really excited about when it comes to archaeology and the Bible is that more often than not, archaeology has been a friend to the Bible. And to kind of translate what that means is that it hasn't disproven a lot of things. It's actually helped cement a lot of things that we know about the times and the histories and the people of that time. And so I really think we should start our conversation off there is let's start off with a negative question in this regard. What archaeology cannot do for the Bible? And what I mean is, like, it can't say, well, archaeology, quote unquote, and I say this quote unquote, can't, say that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. Let's just say, but it can't say that Jesus Christ lived. There's an actual person who lived. And I'm saying, if I'm saying it wrong, please correct me. If I'm saying it wrong, please correct me.
No, that's accurate. Well, let's throw down a few things, because archaeology is one of those things that is often misunderstood. Archaeologists don't dig up dinosaurs. They're generally not interested in prehistoric creatures. Archaeology is the study of the physical remnants of past cultures. And, history studies the written records. And then archaeology looks at the stuff we leave behind, and particularly for cultures that didn't have a written language, like, say, the Native Americans. There's not a single tribe north of the Rio Grande that had a written language. Virtually everything we know about them in the pre-contact era has to be reconstructed through archaeology. On the other hand, historical period sites, we know a lot, say, about slavery in the South. However, slave owners didn't write down a lot of day-to-day details about how their slaves lived. So we use archaeology on the slave cabins to uncover a lot of facts about the day-to-day life of American slaves. And so archaeology and history can kind of go together. There's a whole field of historic archaeology where you're looking at artifacts from an era that already had a written language, but you're trying to supplement your knowledge by studying the things that they left behind. And that's what biblical archaeology is. And biblical archaeology, the whole field, is basically archaeology on sites that relate to the biblical narrative. Much of that is in Israel, but also throughout much of the Roman world, because the stories of the New Testament and the Old Testament weren't exclusively limited to Israel. Right. So what we can do, like you said, as far as the spiritual claims of the New Testament about Jesus being the Son of God and all of that, No, we cannot confirm those. What we can do is demonstrate that the New Testament gets its facts right with regard to places, people, events. And I will say that even from 100 years ago, it is remarkable just how many details of the New Testament and Old Testament narratives had been confirmed by archaeological discoveries, including some things that scientists and historians dismissed and said were simply fables. There's been a lot of discoveries made. For example, 100 years ago it was very fashionable to say that David and Solomon were fables. They were fairy tales made up hundreds of years after the event about men who either A, never existed, or B, at best, were just kind of wandering shepherd kings without the kind of administration and political organization that the Old Testament describes. But what we found in 20th century archaeology and now 21st century archaeology, we have found, for one thing, that there is a style of architecture found throughout the ancient kingdom of Israel that dates to around 1000 A.D., the time of David and Solomon, that shows that there was a strong centralized authority of some sort that made uniformly constructed buildings using a remarkably advanced degree of architecture compared to previous years and previous cultures. And then on top of that, we have actually inscriptions. There's the Tel Dan inscription, which dates to within about 100 years of David's life, which talks about the king of the house of David. So there was actually a Davidic dynasty that ruled over Israel. That's just one thing that's been confirmed through archaeology.
I can't help but think of that film that came out some time ago, The Bible versus the Book of Mormon, and how they had they went to all these various learned people who were experts in their field, like textual criticism, archaeologists, and all kind of stuff. And they just showed, like, how can you find out the cities for this book? They were comparing the Book of Mormon and the Bible because it was a video for the Book of Mormon, just going for the Mormon people. And they were just showing all these different things. And one of the things I learned is that people who live back in the day, they leave things behind. If we had a major catastrophe, you leave stuff behind. He said that's how you know things happen, because people leave stuff behind. If you have a catastrophe, people die. If the country's overrun by a conqueror, you leave stuff behind. And then over time, as you leave things behind, people discover them again because someone digs through the ground. Like you said, you found an Indian arrowhead when you were 5 years old, which spawned up your current interests and hobbies and research now. And so now, when people say, well, how can we know that what these people left behind is what we think they are? How would you respond to that question? Because I have to use popular culture to kind of get my thought across, because I remember an episode of Sliders where they found the parking meter, and he said it was a totem to their god or something, and it was like the parking meter, So how do we know what we see is what we see?
Now, I will say, of course, that it's an old joke among archaeologists that if you don't understand an artifact, you call it ceremonial. It's actually a lot easier when you have a culture with a written record. For example, the history of the Middle East is pretty well documented. I mean, the Romans left us a lot of written histories with the New Testament. We have the book of Acts. And we find written records. We find inscriptions. We find details of all sorts. And so, that enables us to confirm it. Then, for prehistoric cultures, for things that existed, without written records, there's a certain amount of guesswork. They can look at a tool and study the edge wear patterns to see how it might have been used. They look for drawings and things like that might show these tools in daily life. But I will say that the classical archaeologists and the biblical archaeologists have a lot easier time of it because they are dealing with an area for which there are written historical records. And so we use archaeology to just supplement what those records are showing us. There's a lot of guesswork involved in other fields there. It's fascinating to look, and a lot of times, we have the historical records that tell us what the kings did and what Caesar did and what the leaders of the era did, but we don't know a lot about day-to-day life. And so that's what we use archaeology for, to see how the everyday people lived. There's a wonderful dig underway right now. It was not discovered until 2009. But you've heard of Mary Magdalene. Well, the city of Mary Magdalene was called Magdala. And the Jewish historian Josephus tells us that during the Roman conquest of Judea in 70 A.D., the people of Magdala put up a heroic resistance, and the Romans sacked and burned the town. Every single person there was either killed or sold into slavery. And the modern city of Migdal was built about a mile or more from the site of ancient Magdala. And honestly, no one knew exactly where Magdala was. And in 2010 or 2009, a guy is building a guest house for a visitor center to, the site of ancient Magdala, and they found the synagogue. And they found a really neat artifact called the Magdala Stone, which has got a depiction of the temple and the earliest known depiction of a 7-branch menorah. It's just really it is a remarkable discovery. And so what we have is a synagogue that Jesus almost certainly taught in. We have a town where some of his followers were from, and the excavation is ongoing, just as the excavations are ongoing at Capernaum, which is the site where Jesus lived for much of his public ministry, and the hometown of Simon Peter and James and John.
I like how you say that, because when it comes to these things, and it just makes me just really excited thinking about it, we find these ancient cities, these ancient temples and buildings, and it's like people lived here. And thousands of years ago they lived here, hundreds of years ago they lived here, and it's like you're touching the past. It must be like a surreal experience. And I know that Lewis is going to go into that on the other side of break, because he was able to go to Israel. I think went to Israel last year, and he's going to share some of his experience with that. And I can't help but wonder how he's going to put it all together when it comes to archaeology and the Bible. And if you want to weigh in on our topic, you certainly can by calling in at 646-668-8485, then press 1 to be live on air. Or if you hit me on Twitter at ParkerJCo, hashtag PJC Show, with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Hi, is your book club in need of some fresh and exciting questions to ask club members and authors at your next book club meeting? Literations, the book conversation game, is 70 thought-provoking questions to really get into an in-depth discussion about the books you and your club members are reading. These questions really get into the characters, the storyline, and into the author's head. These questions may just give you and your book club members a whole new way to get into a new conversation, a literation. Literations is also a great set of tools for bloggers, interviewers, and authors to use a discussion question. Are you ready to get lit? Please visit our website at litversations.com, litversation.com. And please like our Facebook page at Simply Said Reading Accessories. Thank you.
Have you read the latest issue of SORMAG Digital, the award-winning literary magazine for multicultural readers and writers? SORMAG Digital is available quarterly and showcases interviews with the best authors in multicultural literature. SORMAG Digital features craft and business articles for those interested in writing. If you're looking for a good book, check out our book reviews on what's hot in multicultural literature. For writers looking for new readers to get in front of, SORMAG Digital is the perfect place to introduce your book. We offer advertising spaces that fit your promotional budget. Get your free subscription on SORMAG.com or order a print issue on MagCloud.com. If you would like more information about SORMAG Digital, check us out on SORMAG.com or contact us at SORMAG@yahoo.com. SORMAG Digital is the magazine for multicultural readers and writers.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Parker J. Cole Show on WPJC 104.5. Again, I am so glad you are here with me to talk about archaeology and the Bible. My guest co-host and contributor today is Lewis Smith. He is an author, historian, novelist, and teacher, just all-around cool guy who wears many, many hats, also a pastor. And what he does is tell stories and tells us information and helps us to understand some of the grittier things about history and archaeology and the Bible. And on this show today, we're talking about how archaeology and the Bible are knitted together. One of the things that Lewis said before the break is that, you know, there are a lot of places that we haven't discovered yet. And then back to show that example, they couldn't find out where the city of Magdala was. And they found out the synagogue back in 2009, which is still being excavated and exhibited today. They found it back in 2009. And so perhaps when all those people say there is no proof of something, perhaps it's just a matter of time. Wouldn't you say so, Lewis?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's new discoveries being made constantly of different sorts. I just was looking yesterday at like the top 10 biblical archaeology discoveries of 2016 and 2015, and even in the last couple of years, it's just amazing some of the stuff that has popped up.
I'm looking forward to hearing about your trip to Israel because I knew that must have been a life-changing experience. I remember you were talking about going on your Facebook when you were talking about it. I remember being so jealous, and I know we're not supposed to be jealous. I was like, I want to go to Israel. I want to be there. I would love to walk where Jesus walked, you know. But I was happy jealous. It wasn't a bad jealous, a happy jealous, you know. I'm glad Lewis is going.
Oh, I understand, and I will tell this to every one of your listeners. If you get the chance to go. It is an unforgettable experience. You know, and I never thought that I would be able to do this. It was one of those things that one of these things that just came up. A fellow pastor here in Greenville invited me to go on this trip. It was arranged through the Austin Graduate School of Theology's Biblical Archaeology program. However, they take along a number of interested laymen every year to defray the cost of the trip. And Randy Daw, who's pastor here in Greenville, invited me to go with him. After reading my book, he just said, you have to make this trip, Lewis. And I was like, there's no way I could afford it. But then I wound up, so many people chipped in to help me. It was really humbling, having been a school teacher and a pastor for the better part of these last 30 years, how many people came forward to help me out with this, to make this trip a possibility. And so we spent 10 days in Israel, and we visited over 30 archaeological sites. We spent one day doing what's called archaeological conservancy work. We were remortaring the walls of a 2,000-year-old Roman bathhouse. And
man.
That was really neat, because one thing they tell you is that as soon as you uncover a site, you expose it to the elements again, so you've got to act to preserve it, or it will, it will start to decay immediately. So in this case, what you had was a Roman bathhouse that had been uncovered about 15 years ago, and the mortar that held the stones together would turn to sand and started to decay. And so they used the same recipe for mortar, the same kind of mortar that was used 2,000 years ago, and we spent the whole day mixing up mortar, remortaring the stones together, and cementing the walls, so hopefully they'll stand for another 2,000 years.
Wow.
And so we did that, and then we spent another day excavating a synagogue at a place called Horvath Rimon, and we were each given a grid and a bucket and a shovel. We shoveled up, and all of the pottery shards and all of the artifacts we recovered went into a bucket, and I uncovered a section of a column. You know, the columns were in 5-foot sections that stacked one on top of the other, and we uncovered the column and the pedestal that the column rested on, and that was really, really fascinating to see all of that. It was just an amazing event to go and see how that, and then to visit. We went literally from Dan to Beersheba, from the northernmost tip of Israel to the southernmost tip. We saw the site where the Dead Sea Scrolls were recovered at Qumran. We saw En-Gedi, which is the beautiful area, that valley above the Dead Sea where David went to hide from Saul during the days that David was a fugitive. Lots of cool archaeology has been done there. We went up to the top of Masada. We went to Tel Dan, which is where the oldest inscription of the name of David has been found. Lots of neat stuff there. One thing that's interesting, during the reign of Hezekiah, there was a religious revival, and all of the high places outside the city gates that the Israelites had built to worship foreign gods were destroyed. Well, right outside the gates of the city of Dan was a high place, an altar to the gods, and what they found inside it were a bunch of idols that had been smashed and buried there right around the time described in the Bible when King Hezekiah would have ruled. And just stuff like that all over. And then, of course, once you're inside Jerusalem, there is so much there. I visited the Ecce Homo Basilica, which is the site of there's a Roman arch there that is part of the old fortress of Antonia, which is where the Roman governor's headquarters were, and that's the traditional site where the trial of Jesus took place. And supposedly this arch is the very arch under which Pilate presented Jesus to the crowd in the streets and said, Ecce Homo, behold the man. And standing at that place, which I described so vividly in my book, The Redemption of Pontius Pilate, that was just a real breathtaking moment for me to look and know that this is where that happened. To visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or Simon Peter's house in Capernaum, which is a remarkable archaeological story there as well. It was truly life-changing.
What was, you say, if you had to take all your experiences and take out just one nugget that you would say, you know what, this was the culminating part of the whole entire journey, what would that be?
Oh, gosh, there were a lot. I mean, especially like seeing my first Roman ruin, seeing the places where Jesus walked, but really, I guess the one moment that really took my breath away was at Capernaum on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. That was the village where Simon Peter and Andrew and James and John fished from. That was the center of Jesus' ministry 2,000 years ago. And anyway, in the course of this excavation at Capernaum, a number of years ago, they found they knew that there was a church there from the Middle Ages that was supposedly built over the site of Simon Peter's house. Well, they started excavating, and beneath that they found an octagonal church from the 4th century A.D., from about 350, 380 A.D., that had been built there that bore the name of Simon Peter on the altar. But then they dug down beneath that, and what's fascinating, they found a 1st century A.D. home. A little bit larger than normal, but not very. It was just a pretty standard 1st century home. Some of the artifacts they found inside included fishing hooks, net mending needles, pottery shards, and things like that. And then they discovered that around the middle of the 1st century A.D., that the central room of this home was enlarged to a meeting place. They found multiple graffiti, all of it Christian in nature, invocations and prayers to Christ, and 2 pieces of graffiti from the tail end of the 1st century that included the name of Simon Peter. And they concluded with a probability of about 95% that this is Simon Peter's house, that it was turned into an early meeting place of the Christian church. Within 50 years of the time of Christ, within 20 years of the death of Peter, people were meeting there and holding worship services. That this was one of the first physical church buildings ever located, and it is humbling to think as you look through the walls of the 10th century church, through the walls of the 4th century church, and down onto those humble flagstones of this 1st century home, that you are looking at flagstones that Jesus himself walked on.
Wow.
That just took my breath away.
And I can't help, I know the verse has been highly debated for many, many, many years, but I couldn't help when you was talking about it, saying, upon this rock I'll build my church. That's the first thing that came to mind as soon as you started. When you said about Simon Peter's house, I was like, wow. Like I said, I'm not saying that's what it meant, but oh my gosh, that's the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that. That just sounds so incredible. And what I really like about you sharing your journey with us is that you're saying the names of the Bible, that the names of the cities that we all see in the Bible, the people that existed.
Oh, I know. That was one of the things that was almost surreal. Is you're seeing these names that you've read in Scripture your whole life on road signs, Nazareth, Caesarea, Bethlehem, 20 miles or 40 kilometers or whatever. It's just, it is so amazing to think that this is the place where we're actually here. It probably took about 2 days for it to really soak in that we were there. And particularly when I went to Caesarea, because I mentioned briefly my other novel, The Redemption of Pontius Pilate. That's a historical novel that is set in the first century that I wrote, and I tried to, as best I could, tell Pilate's story from his point of view, using the history and also using some imagination. It's about half and half because a lot of his life is undocumented. But to go to Caesarea, where the governor's palace was, and to see these places, one of the neater moments was in my novel, there's a tavern in Caesarea that figures into the story pretty prominently. There's a number of clandestine meetings there as the story develops. And when I went to Caesarea, rounded a corner, and there's the remnants of this first century tavern, pretty much exactly as I described it in my book. And on the one hand, it wasn't a far leap. What port town doesn't have a few taverns? But on the other hand, to know that, here is the place that I envisioned, and now I'm here. And particularly at Caesarea, the only inscription of Pontius Pilate's name that was done while he was governor was discovered there. And so that was just, that was fascinating to see the Pontius Pilate stone, to see the amphitheater there that Pilate built, and so many other things all around. And also, probably the funniest moment of the whole trip. Can I tell a funny story?
Oh, you can.
Okay, so Randy Daw has been a pastor for 35 years. I've been a pastor for almost 30 years now. And some of the other people on the trip, I mean, it's deacons, a couple of deacons from his church, and a couple of biblical archaeology students for the university. So you might say we're a pretty Christian bunch. We're going through the ruins of Caesarea, and there's these beautiful mosaic floors that are perfectly preserved in the interiors of these houses. So we come to this one large house, and in the middle of the floor is this marble-lined bathtub that is at least 10 feet across. I mean, this is a party tub, right? And we're thinking, wow, this must have been the home of a very wealthy Roman. And so we worked our way around to the far side, and in the vestibule of the home, the mosaic was perfectly preserved, and there was a Greek inscription there. Now, I cannot read Greek, but Randy's quite the scholar. And I said, Randy, can you give us a translation? And he read it and just started laughing out loud. I was like, what is it? He said, oh, it's body. It's body. I'm like, what is it? He said, well, as near as I can translate, it says, enter here men who wish to fornicate. So we found a 2,000-year-old brothel. Leave it to the preachers, right? And of course, then nothing would do but all of us piled into the bathtub for a group picture.
Right. Guess where we are. You know what? I was listening to that story. I just couldn't help how the past and the present kind of interact. You know what I mean? And you have this joining, and I can't think of how. I can't just help but think about how the Lord just brings it all together. That we can have our faith that has carried us through for so many years. You know what I mean? And to have that reiterated in so many different ways through these places
and these things we find. Little bits of detail for the biblical narrative confirmed for us. Well, just for example, something as basic as the crucifixion of Jesus. For years, people said, well, the Romans did not nail people to the crosses. They tied them to the crosses, so that's obviously an invention from a later era. But then in the 1960s, in an excavation in Jerusalem, they opened up this ossuary, this bone box, and what they found was the ankle bone of a crucifixion victim that still had a nail through it, as well as the name of the young man on the box. He was a zealot who had been crucified during the Great Uprising. just about 3 decades after the time of Christ. So it just confirms that, yes, the Romans did nail people to the cross from time to time. And so many other details, just little things like the story of John and the blind, or in John's gospel, the blind man that Jesus found at the pool of Bethesda with the 5 porticos, and the belief among the people that the water had healing properties. And for years, that was just dismissed as a fairy tale because not one other historian mentions the pool of Bethesda. Josephus doesn't talk about it in any of his works. Yet, lo and behold, as they were doing some street work in Jerusalem in the 1950s, what did they find? Exactly where John described it, near the sheep gate in the city of Jerusalem, a pool with 5 porticos around it, with columns around it, and some of the graffiti they found around the pool indicated that the people believed the waters could heal. So it was exactly where John placed it.
You know, I always, and this is kind of off tangent, I always wondered how come the Lord doesn't have a pool of Bethesda right now for a bunch of people. And I probably say because the government probably, or whatever, would probably close it down, shut it down, people trying to get healed, people jumping over things to do it, you know. I always thought,
I think God's blessed us with a great deal of medical knowledge that the Romans didn't have. You know, I think God still works miracles, but he works them with medicine and hospitals more often. But I'll tell you what, you talk to doctors, and there's not a doctor you'll meet that cannot tell you a story of a patient who should by all rights be dead, and he's not. Matter of fact, they even have a term. They call it a clinical miracle, where you see a healing that should not have happened but did for reasons that science cannot explain.
Yeah, and they're saying, wow, bless the Lord. They go, we just put on the clinical miracle. I love it. I love it. When we come back, we'll be talking more to Louis about archaeology and the Bible. Bible's really fascinating. Just so happy to hear about his trip to Israel. If you want to get more information about Louis, you certainly can. You can follow him on Twitter at author N.D. Smith, or you can follow him on Facebook. Simply put in Louis Smith, or put in the testimonium, or the Redemption of Pontius Pilate. You'll find him there. He's a wonderful, like I said, orator, wonderful novelist and author, and just this wonderful guy. If you have any questions about the topic or anything like that, we're going to go ahead and take a quick short break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Are you a reader looking for more compelling Christian fiction? Maybe something a little more edgy or a bit more real? Are you tired of most Christian fiction shying away from the truth and settling for a rose-tinted view of the world and its issues? Or are you an author who has a compelling story to tell, but you're afraid it doesn't jive with today's brand of Christian or secular fiction? Are you tired of Christian publishers telling you that your content is too edgy? Or maybe you've tried submitting your content under the radar to secular publishers only to be told your themes are a bit too religious? We invite you to take a look at the Crossover Alliance. We are an online publishing company that specializes in edgy Christian speculative fiction with Christian themes and real-world content. Our company is formed from authors and readers just like you who are breaking into the mainstream and Christian markets with this compelling genre. Head over to the www.thecrossoveralliance.com for all the details on who we are, what we do, and what we accept. Right now, if you sign up for our email newsletter, you'll receive a free digital copy of our first short story anthology. Check us out today and help us spread the word about the Crossover Alliance, where light shines brighter in the darkness.
Autism affects 1 in 68 children, sweeping all racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic groups. Autism is a lifelong brain disorder that leads to untold challenges to the physical, financial, and social well-being of people with autism and their families. Resources are stretched thin. The Autism Alliance of Michigan, a collective voice for families across the entire state, uses resources to help families battle challenges right here, right now. If you or anyone you know needs help navigating the autism journey, contact the Autism Alliance of Michigan today, 877-463-AAOM, or visit them online at aaomi.org.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Parker J. Cole Show right here on WPJC 104.5. So glad you're here with me. We've been having a wonderful time discussing archaeology and the Bible with my guest co-host and contributor today, Louis Smith. He's an author, a preacher, a novelist, historian, an amateur archaeologist as well, and he's been helping us a lot with understanding this whole knitting together of archaeology and the Bible. And Lewis, once again, thanks for being with us on the show today. Now, I have made a comment, Lewis, about earlier in the broadcast, I made a comment about the movie The Book of Mormon versus the Bible. And I wanted to revisit that because I think it's highly important that in our search for truth, even though people are saying right now we're in a post-truth society, which makes absolutely no sense, but even though it doesn't. It makes no sense at all. It's like people just, if you want to say you want to believe what you want to believe, fine. Just say, I don't want to believe it. I can respect that more than you saying truth is what you make of it. And it's not the case. But anyway, that's another subject for another time. We'll get to that later. But in the Book of Mormon versus the Bible, it was very telling about how much archaeology was a friend of the Bible, proving a lot of the places that existed. Whereas the Book of Mormon, they have a lot of places and cultures and names and things of that nature that you can't find in the real world. And so I want to talk about that because I want to kind of talk about how this is such a really important idea to understand.
Well, I appreciate that. And let me just say up front, every Mormon that I have ever met, they are lovely people. They have high moral standards. They're wonderful people. But the Book of Mormon itself simply does not stand up to historical and archaeological scrutiny. The thing you have to understand is that when Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon in the 1830s, archaeology was a science in its infancy, and American archaeology in particular was virtually unknown. And so most of the stories in the Book of Mormon supposedly happened here in North America. He describes the rise of kingdoms and empires and great battles that they fought against one another. And a lot of it is obviously kind of, loosely based on events in the New Testament. But he transferred everything over here to North America. And the fact is that even the most skeptical archaeologist, you get a complete atheist who questions every aspect of the biblical narrative. He will still have to acknowledge that there was a Roman Empire. There was a city called Jerusalem. There was a village called Capernaum, and most of them will grudgingly admit that there probably really was a person named Jesus of Nazareth. And, we talked about how so many of the fine details of the Bible narrative have been confirmed in inscriptions, in manuscripts, in archaeological discoveries. And you come to the Book of Mormon, and there's just no comparison. Now, Mormon archaeologists have tried to say that, well, the Hopewell Indian culture represents the Nephite Empire or something like that. But you read the descriptions in the Book of Mormon, and it describes battles being fought with metal weapons. Essentially, it's portraying the North American cultures as being either a Bronze Age or Iron Age culture, which is what the Old Testament was mostly Bronze Age, the Roman Empire was Iron Age. The fact is, every single tribe in North America was a Stone Age tribe. They did not have the wheel. They literally had not invented the wheel, so they could not have chariots. They had not invented metal, so they could not have swords and shields. It doesn't stack up what is claimed in the Book of Mormon. And really, you're almost forced to conclude that Joseph Smith was something of a fraud. And I think nothing illustrates this better than the story of the lost Book of Abraham. Shortly before Joseph Smith died, he was killed in 1840, a merchant there in Illinois brought him a manuscript, which he had bought in Cairo, Egypt, at an antique mall, and it was in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, at that time, there were probably fewer than a dozen people in the world who could read hieroglyphics because Egyptology was in its infancy. The Rosetta Stone was still being deciphered. And so Joseph Smith took this Egyptian scroll because the man said, I hear you can decipher ancient things. He had heard about the golden tablets. And Smith looked at it and said, oh, this is the lost Book of Abraham. And he translated it out to this book about Abraham and Isaac. And I think for a while it was even incorporated into the Book of Mormon. Well, in the 1960s, a steamer trunk was found that belonged to Joseph Smith. It was found in an attic in a house in Nauvoo, Illinois, where he was killed. And among other things, there was this Egyptian scroll, and there were Smith's quote-unquote translation notes. Well, when Egyptologists at one of the universities there deciphered the Egyptian scroll, it was a funerary chant to Osiris. It had Anubis in it, but it did not have Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. In fact, Joseph Smith's whole translation was completely made up.
Yeah.
And to me, that just really illustrates that you know, if you want to take the Book of Mormon as a source of spiritual inspiration, that's your decision, but you cannot call it a work of history. On the other hand, the New Testament, just to give one example, and I'm trying not to run us out of time, in Luke and Acts together, there are some 44 different names that are given to officials within the Roman Empire and also the titles that they bore. And the thing is that through history and archaeology together, we have determined that in every instance, Luke gives the right name and title for the right official at the right time and the right place. And considering how often those titles change, that's something that later Roman historians didn't even always get right.
What I find fascinating about your response to that, and like I said, this show is not talking about the Book of Mormon or anything like that. That will be coming up later on this year, has the Four Mormons on the show. But the thing is that it just shows you how important archaeology is into understanding that what we read about the Word is true, that it's based in fact. And what's really important nowadays, because people want to say truth is what you make of it, they don't want to say that it's objective and outside of yourself. You know, they want to say, well, it's internal, it's subjective, it's what I make of it. This is my truth, not your truth. This is your truth, not my truth. All these other kind of things. And that's why we have so much chaos going on. And so when you have that objective, unbiased truth, then you can actually stand on it because it's not based off of anything that you can influence. You know what I'm saying? And
exactly.
With archaeology, and as Luz was saying to our listeners out there, archaeology is a friend of the Bible. It knits it together. You know, like we clarified earlier, it may not be able to say the spiritual claims of that Jesus may be the Son of God, but to say, hey, Jesus existed. There was a man named Jesus who existed. It may not be able to say all these things. And I think that's important for those of us for those of you who are skeptics or agnostics or atheists, you know, you can use archaeology as one of your tools to discover whether or not Christianity is true. Go ahead. I mean, I've always said God stands with the truth quite often. I often said that.
And I will also add that not every detail of the Bible has been confirmed yet. For example, we have not found the evidence of the Exodus from Egypt in the place where we thought we would find it. You know, they looked pretty extensively in the 70s and just really did not find. But the thing to understand there is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You know, I still believe the Exodus occurred. I just think that they probably were looking in the wrong places. Maybe place names changed over time, and not everything leaves traces. You know, we're not going to ever be able to confirm everything, but there's a lot of things we can confirm, and it's remarkable the degree to which archaeology has confirmed the truths that we find in Scripture, and particularly, like I said, in the New Testament, we have found so much overwhelming evidence that the place names, the people are accurately recorded. And if the New Testament is accurate in its smaller claims, then it's much less of a leap of faith to say that it's accurate in its greater claims as well. So that's that's what archaeology can do for us. It can give proof of some objective truths that help us reach towards the greater spiritual truths. Amen.
Amen. I think you said that quite eloquently. And it brings me to my next topic. We got a few minutes left here. It brings me to my next topic. And it spawned from a question that we received from Elaine in Texas. Elaine, thank you for your comment. She said there used to be a TV show which claimed biblical archaeological information, and the name of that TV show is called The Naked Archaeologist. And many said that what he said wasn't true. And so when I talked to Lewis in between the break, Lewis said that he's not quite sure about, I've never heard of the show, and he hadn't heard of the show either. But I want to talk about those people who use archaeology to just make a mockery and just be fake and just present, you know, incredulous ideas and statements. So go ahead and talk about that real quick.
Well, the number one reason that fake archaeological discoveries are out there, frankly, is to make money. Okay, you know, my hobby is collecting Indian arrowheads. There are guys all over the United States right now chipping out flint arrowheads and artificially aging them so they can sell them as ancient. And matter of fact, there's a whole field of authentication, guys that know a lot about artifacts and put them under a microscope to see if they're authentic or not. And some of them are good enough they can fool the authenticators. You see the same thing in the Middle East and in Israel because there's a booming underground market in antiquities. And the problem is, if an artifact isn't recovered in context, it's much harder to determine its authenticity. So in the case of, well, here's one that made the headlines a few years ago, the James ossuary. You know, it was the burial custom of the Jews. They would lay their dead in caves, and then a year or two later they would open the burial up, and by then the body was completely skeletonized. They would take the bones, clean them and wash them, and stack them in a limestone box or a basalt box, scratch the person's name on it, and then clean off the burial slab for the next person. And these bone boxes are called ossuaries, and they're found all over the ancient Middle East, some of them very ornate and very fancy. I actually saw the ossuary that Caiaphas, the high priest who presided over Jesus' trial, was buried in, and it was a very ornate and fancy ossuary. Well, a few years ago, they made a discovery of this ossuary that was inscribed with the name James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. And so there was a huge bit of hype over that. Was this the ossuary of James the Just, the brother of Jesus, who died shortly before the siege of Jerusalem? Because, you know, James is one of these historical figures Josephus writes about him, the early church fathers wrote about him, he authored one of the books of our New Testament, Paul writes about him. This would have been a huge discovery. But the Israeli Antiquities Authority analyzed the ossuary, and they said while the ossuary was authentic, the inscription was modern. And so that's an example of a faked discovery. You know, the ossuary itself was authentic, but the inscription was added for the purpose of money and notoriety. You know, just recently, this last year, they've announced the discovery of 10 scrolls supposedly found in the region of the original Dead Sea Scrolls by illegal artifact diggers that showed up on the black market. The problem is it's going to take a couple of years to authenticate these scrolls and see, are they really more scrolls from the Qumran area, or are they clever forgeries created for the purpose of being sold on the international black market for artifacts? And so, you know, stuff like that is ongoing. And then there's discoveries that are interesting, but they haven't been confirmed yet. Something really interesting that came out of Egypt last year, they announced the discovery of a substantial fragment of Mark's Gospel. It's about 3 or 4 verses of Mark's Gospel that were found inside a funerary mask. You know, we think of the golden mask of Tutankhamun. Not all Egyptians could afford that, so lower-class Egyptians would make masks out of what we call papier-mâché. They would take old papyrus, recycled documents, and weave them together with glue, put a little shellac on them, and paint them into a funerary mask. Well, this particular mask, they flipped it over, and on the inside, there's a fragment of Mark's Gospel. So first of all, they've got to find a way to unbind that ancient glue and work that papyrus loose from the rest. Then they have to carbon date it. But as of right now, they're saying that this copy of Mark's Gospel dates between 80 and 90 A.D. If that date holds up, they're still testing it, but if that date holds up, that is the earliest fragment of any of the 4 Gospels ever found, and it dates within 20 years of the time that Mark's Gospel was written. Because most scholars will say Mark was probably written between 60 and 70. I think it might have been even a decade earlier than that. But anyway, so this will be a very significant discovery, but they're still evaluating it. And that's the other thing. I know in my book, one thing I took some liberties with was speeding up the story. In the real world, confirming archaeological discoveries takes a lot of time. And particularly in the testimonium, I compressed the events that probably should have taken about a year into a single month for the sake of the narrative. But, you know, I did that with the tip of the hat, and my apologies to the real archaeologists out there for the sake of the story.
You have our creative license for a reason, right?
There you go.
I was thinking about it, because your book reminds me of Paul Mayer's book, Oh gosh, you know what I'm talking about.
A Skeleton in God's Closet.
Yeah, Skeleton in God's Closet, which was
Oh,
phenomenal.
I love that book.
That book
Paul
is so
Meyer
good.
is brilliant.
Oh yeah,
and
he
you know
did
what's
one on
funny is that after I finished writing The Redemption of Pontius Pilate, I discovered that Paul Meyer had also done a book about Pilate almost 25 years before. Now, I will say his is probably sticks closer to history than mine. I think mine's a little more fun. But it was interesting after I finished my book to go back and read his. And, you know, our artistic license took us in different directions. But it was still, you know, it was just a neat comparison to see how two different writers explored the same topic.
Yeah. And it's funny because when I saw that, I said, oh, my gosh, Lewis just did this, too. Because I saw it was available on Amazon for something. And I don't know if it was for free or something like that, but it was available. I was like, oh, he got another book out. And I was looking at it, and I was like, wow, Lewis. I remember thinking about you a lot. Like, he just did Pontius Pilate, and this came out not exactly the same time, but just around that same time period. And I was laughing. I just thought, wow, I wonder how they're going to do it.
Well, A Skeleton in God's Closet, I will admit, is one of the books that inspired me.
Oh, yeah, I love that book. And I was reading that book, and he did such a great job with letting us know that if we found something so devastating to our faith, I mean, it's huge, you know, then we find all the twists and turns of it. It was a huge thing, and I had no idea about how archaeology was involved until I read that book, you know, because he did a really good job, you know, getting all that detail for us and stuff. But I really like that. I wasn't quite as into the second one, which is more than a skeleton, something like that. I wasn't quite into that one.
I haven't read that one. I haven't read that one, but I would be interested to.
Yeah, that one had to more of the
Paul Meyer is you know, a much more you know, I mean, I got my master's. That guy's got like double PhDs, so he is definitely a little bit ahead of me in terms of historical credentials.
Right, he said it's okay, you know, but he's he's a wonderful author and a wonderful book, and of course Lewis is as well too. And if you've been listening carefully to the show, he's been interspersing his books that he does, because historical fiction and historical narrative is what Lewis does, and he really has a wonderful hand at peeling back the layers of the past and bring us into the present, place into the future. A wonderful writer. Go ahead and tell them where the names of your books and then your website or your blog that you have, so they can connect with you.
Okay. Well, I have 3 novels in print right now. The first one was called The Testimonium. The second one, The Redemption of Pontius Pilate. And then most recently, out for just a little over a year now, Matthew's Autograph. My newest novel, Lover of God, is another first-century historical novel, and it will be out in April. It is actually the story of Theophilus, the otherwise unknown person that Luke dedicated his gospel and the book of Acts towards. So those will be out in the near future, and I'm very excited about that. And then I just finished last year the 3rd volume in the Testimonium trilogy called The Gnostic Library. And if you enjoy the Testimonium and Matthew's Autograph, I think you'll find The Gnostic Library is a remarkable conclusion. Well, I say that. I love those characters. I can't promise that I'll never revive them, but I did kind of bring their story full circle in that one. You can follow me at author Indy Smith on Twitter. I also have a blog that I update every week, and in fact, I'll be doing an update probably tomorrow night on archaeology of the Bible, kind of corresponding with some of the stuff we've talked about today. But it is Lewis Literary Lair at blogspot.com, and so I'd invite people to follow me there. I write about a little bit of everything. I write about politics. I write about history of the Bible. I publish some of my short stories there. I kind of wanted to wait to start a new book because I'm so far ahead of my publication, my release dates. So this summer and fall, I wrote a bunch of short stories, and you can scroll back through my blog and read some of my short stories. I even returned to my first love and wrote some horror stories. I had not written a horror story since the 1980s. So there's some of those on there. You can even scroll back to last March. And while I was in Israel, I did day-by-day updates on my blog for every day of the trip to Israel. So if you want to go to my blog and scroll back to March March 10th through 20th is the chronicle of my Israel trip. I will say this, nearly every one of those entries I had to do on my phone, and I have big fat fingers, so there's probably more typos in those entries than any other portion of my blog. It was just really hard to proofread and correct all of them. But that being said, it's a fun blog. I would encourage you to follow me on it. Right now I'm getting typically between 50 and 100 views a week. I'd love to see that bump up to a couple of hundred a week, now when I was in Israel, my numbers went off the charts. I don't think I've ever had the readership that I had with that, because people were checking in every day to see where I'd been and what I'd done, and it was really very humbling and gratifying to see that. Anyway, so yeah, you can connect with me there. Each of my books has its own Facebook page, Matthew's Autograph, The Testimonium, and Pontius Pilate, as well as you can find me personally on Facebook. And I've got a couple of book signing events coming up. Next Saturday, I'm going to be at Half Price Books in Rockwall, Texas. And then February 27th, I will be at Half Price Books in Mesquite, Texas. So all your listeners in Texas, come on by. I'll be glad to chat with you, let you get a signed copy of my books. I love connecting with people in person. One of the most enjoyable things about being an author has been just getting out and meeting people.
And what I want to say is thank you so much for being with us on the show today, Louis. We're out of time, and I know we haven't really touched the surface of this topic, but I hope we did justice to it. I can't wait to have you back real soon to go some more into it. I don't think we touched the surface of it, but thank you so much for being with me.
All right. Well, it was my pleasure, and I look forward to coming back.
You know, one thing about Louis that I always appreciate is that he's such a wealth and a wellspring of information. And like he gave you all his social media outlets where you can find him online. And you want to take a of that, because in a world that says we're in a post-truth world, he's doing what he can to give you truth. And not just truth as he sees, but objective, as much as possible, unbiased truth. So go ahead and visit him, read his stories, leave a review. Loving my brother today. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask him. I know Louis, more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And I bet you, if he didn't have the answer to it, he'll find someone who does. And so I want to encourage you that as you do your biblical studies, consider going into archaeology and archaeological studies and articles, stuff like that, and see if maybe that can also help with your studies as well. I think it's a good way to kind of let you know that what your faith is not just based on a belief system, but it's also based in reality. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of the Parker J. Cole Show. You have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day, and God bless.
Right now, save 50% off everything at Gap Factory and 50 to 70% off everything at Banana Republic Factory. That's right, 50% off or more on everything in stores and online. Save with teas starting at $6.99 and 40% off clearance at Gap Factory stores. And at Banana Republic Factory stores, fabulous tops start at $9.99 and 50% off clearance. Hurry! Search our store locator for your nearest Gap Factory and Banana Republic Factory store, or shop us online.
Tim's 2 for $4 breakfast sandwich deal is back, only at Tim Hortons. That means you can wake up to a great breakfast at a great price. Get 2 breakfast sandwiches on a freshly baked bagel, homestyle biscuit, or English muffin with either sausage or bacon for just $4. It's a deal so good, I'm on my way to Tim Hortons right now. Literally. At participating U.S. restaurants, offer available on standard breakfast sandwiches for a limited time plus applicable taxes. Single sandwiches at regular price.